what has happened to Trayvon Martin and how the judicial system was stacked against him.
I was at the NAACP, and I do know that they're pushing it. And over a year and a half ago, I asked them to investigate, and they're looking at it. But the main situation is that we do know that Mr. Martin's civil rights have been violated. We do know that. I don't think they have determined what they're going to do, but certainly we will be pushing for them to do a thorough investigation. When people see a young African American shot down and not guilty, and a black female, all of them in my district, both of them in my district, shoot a one and shot and get 20 years, it is clear that the system is broken.
She says that the system is broken. Let's have a discussion about this. Really important discussion going on here right now. Let's bring in Jason Riley from the Wall Street Journal and the Daily Beast columnist Kirsten Powers. Both are Fox News contributors. Jason, I want to start with you. You wrote a very powerful piece in the Wall Street Journal that I think will be controversial as well. And in it, you say that the left wants to blame black criminality on racial animus, which clearly we just heard from both of these women, and the system. But you say that blacks have long been part of running that system, and you blame them in part.
That's right. I think that if the black leadership from President Obama on down wants to play a constructive role here, and this is what I think is driving a lot of these protests going on around the country, this perception that a black male, this perception of black male criminality played a role in this case. And we have no evidence from the case itself that it did. But if you were of the opinion that it did, that Trayvon Martin's race or how he was dressed played some role, then the black community could address what is driving those perceptions of black criminality. And what is driving them is hard statistical data that shows that blacks commit a staggeringly disproportionate number of crimes in this country. For instance, blacks are about 13% of the population, yet responsible for around half of all murders. And so that is what needs to address. If we want to change perceptions of black criminality, we need to change the behavior of the young black men disproportionately responsible for this crime. And that requires having an honest discussion within the black community, between black leaders and parents and children and so forth, and being honest about making behavioral changes that will therefore change perceptions.
Yeah, I mean, what Jason has gotten at in this piece, Kirsten, is that if black leaders hope to change that perception, and everyone agrees that what happened to Trayvon Martin was a tragedy. The death of this young man is something that everyone grieves. But if you're going to start talking about the larger issues, and these women are arguing that the larger issue is that racism is still rampant in this country, that he was stereotyped. And Jason argues that leaders need to look into why that would be and answer that question in a much more realistic way, starting at the top. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I'm listening to both of you keep referring to black criminality, and of course there was no black criminality in this incident. The person who did the killing was George Zimmerman. Trayvon Martin did not commit any crime or even do anything that could be construed as a crime. So I think what I heard these members of Congress talking about was what they see as an unfair or disproportionate or racist, perhaps, way that black men are treated by our judicial system, and that they're not getting a fair shake. And that's something that I really have a hard time disagreeing with, and I don't really know how anyone can disagree with it. I think that Jason raises some important issues in his column, but I don't think that's what these members of Congress are talking about. They specifically brought up sentencing, and look, there is no question that black men are sentenced to longer sentences than white men are. The U.S. Sentencing Commission found that 20% longer for the exact same crime. I think that those are the issues that need to be looked at around this. Did George Zimmerman get off on this? Basically, they didn't technically use stand your ground, but the jury used that language. One jury used that language. The jury instructions used that language, because he was an African-American man, and so we assume he must have been up to no good.
Well, given that everyone from the prosecution on down says race was not a role here, and given that the verdict was acquittal, I mean, there's a very high hurdle for the Justice Department. Now, maybe the Congressional Black Caucus has some smoking gun tape that no one's seen where George Zimmerman yelled, "Die, black man," right before he pulled the trigger. But barring that, I think there's going to be a very high hurdle for the Justice Department to clear in order for these charges, if they bring them, to go anywhere. But Kristen, to the point that the criminal justice system is racist, which is one of the conversations being discussed in wake of this verdict, I mean, I'm of the opinion that the criminal justice system reflects the black crime rates. It is not their cause. And that's the problem here with the black leadership today wanting to blame other people for the problems in the black community. And I think that the black community needs to take a hard look at its own behavior. Again, if you are of the opinion that perceptions of black criminality led to what happened to Trayvon Martin, I'm not arguing that that was the case, but there are a lot of people out there who are saying that is the case. And if you hold that view, then there are ways to go forward and have an honest conversation about what drives those perceptions. And they're not only perceptions by whites. Remember Jesse Jackson's famous quote where he said, "When I look behind me in a dark alley and see white people, I feel relieved." So these are not just perceptions coming from whites, they're also coming from law-abiding blacks, and they are based on black behavior, and that is what we need to address.
Yeah, it's a very interesting conversation, and Kirsten, you know, I understand your point and where you're coming from, and I also understand Jason's point, but I think if there are larger implications to be drawn from this case, and I think that we all have an understanding, and we understand the tensions that surround this case and the passion and the grief for this young man. But if the larger lesson to be learned here, does it include things that the president brought up himself, you know, in speeches that he made early on? We're not a white America, we're not a black America, we're the United States of America. He spoke in those early speeches as well about the importance of parenting in the black community, the need for fathers in the black community. Some of these things are themes that we have not heard him, you know, continue to hammer home very forcefully in the subsequent years of his presidency. Kirsten, and then I'd like to get Jason's thoughts on that as well.
I think the president has actually talked about it quite a bit, and I would give him credit for it. It's not really his job, and I think that I don't know how many other presidents have talked as much about that. He, in fact, got kind of in trouble for doing it at Morehouse. I think sometimes the African-American community doesn't particularly like it. But, you know, I think that what's being missed is the argument that I think is being made by the NAACP, which is that because it was a young black man, and because I guess there's this perception that we're supposed to accept that it was okay to think that he was a criminal or something. I mean, I'm trying to suss out exactly what the argument is here. You know, that then people understand it more, that George Zimmerman should have been in fear for his life, versus the other case of Marissa Alexander, which was alluded to in the clip, where you have an African-American woman who's denied using stand your ground and is not allowed, you know, the jury would not even consider that as a defense when she was provided a warning shot against an abusive
No one is
husband.
saying that Trayvon Martin was a criminal in this case. They're saying, I think what Jason's referring to is the fact that if you're saying, well, it was because of a perception that he must be a criminal.
I actually don't agree with that, but that's what I keep hearing
that you have to,
Jason saying.
So, all right, we've got 30 seconds, and obviously we need 3 hours. But Jason, you go ahead. I want you to have the last word here.
Well, I think, like I said, the prosecution said race wasn't an issue here. The family, Trayvon Martin's family, even said before the verdict that race wasn't a factor. So that has to make you believe that it is a result of the verdict that they are now looking at a different angle at trying to go after George Zimmerman. That's not our system. That is not the way it should be.
I hate to cut you off, and I apologize, and I've got a delay, so I'm going to take a quick break. Thank you so much, both of you, for being here. We'll be right back.
America is in terrible financial trouble.